One moment I was leading the quarterly strategy review, and the next I was being escorted out like a stranger. No explanation beyond a cold, "Your position has been reevaluated." 12 years of loyalty reduced to a line item on someone's spreadsheet. I walked through that lobby feeling gutted, ashamed, and strangely steady, because even in that moment of betrayal, I remembered something they didn't. The contract they thought I'd forgotten, the one detail that would flip everything back in my favor. Before we go on, share what you'd have done. And if you want more stories told honestly, I'd be grateful if you subscribed. I didn't know that morning would be the last time I ever walked into StratusWest as someone who mattered. I remember how ordinary everything felt. The soft hum of the elevators, the smell of burnt coffee from the break room, the screens flickering awake as the office lights brightened. I'd spent 12 years building this place into something that resembled a real company, not just a cluster of departments pretending to collaborate. Clients trusted me. Executives depended on me. Even the interns whispered that if you wanted something fixed, you went to Kinsley. It wasn't pride. It was simply the truth. I had the kind of institutional memory you can't buy and can't fake. Late-night calls, failed launches, impossible deadlines, fires extinguished before anyone even smelled the smoke. None of that felt heavy to me. I liked being the person who could solve things, who knew the small details others ignored, who saw cracks before they split open. That morning, though, I felt something I hadn't let myself feel in years, a kind of restlessness humming under my skin. Maybe it was the way the new COO, Damon, had been strutting around like he owned the place. Maybe it was the sudden shift in tone in the leadership Slack channels, half-baked buzzwords about operational evolution, efficiency alignment, and automated relationship scalability, all of which sounded like nonsense stitched together by someone who'd never met an actual client. I'd been through 5 leadership transitions, 3 strategic restructures, 2 mergers, and 1 acquisition. I knew when real change was coming, and I knew when someone was posturing to cover their own inexperience. Damon was the second kind. I watched him walk past my desk that morning without even glancing my direction, as if he'd already decided who was useful and who wasn't. That didn't bother me at first. I'd outlasted plenty of executives who started strong and burned out faster than they could finish rearranging the org chart. But then I saw the tiny details. My name missing from the prep doc for the quarterly review, a meeting invite removed without explanation, 2 team leads whispering near the printer and going silent when I approached. Still, I didn't assume the worst. In corporate life, paranoia keeps you alive, but optimism keeps you human. So I focused on what I always did, my clients. They didn't care about org charts or new titles. They cared about follow-through. They cared about someone picking up the phone at 9 p.m. They cared about someone who remembered why their last campaign failed or why their CFO preferred narrative summaries instead of dashboards. Around noon, while preparing for an afternoon call with a long-term account, I caught a glimpse of Damon through the glass walls of the executive floor. He was talking to HR, hands slicing through the air like he was cutting away pieces he didn't need. Something in my stomach tightened, but I shook it off. I'd survived too much to worry about a man who measured competence by how loudly he said the word innovation. I didn't know then that he'd already made a decision about me. I didn't know that he believed he could erase someone like me. And I definitely didn't know he was about to find out how wrong he was. I had barely settled into my chair when Damon's assistant appeared at my desk, her expression tightly neutral, the kind people wear when they've been told not to get involved. "He needs you in conference room C," she said, refusing to meet my eyes. Conference room C was the one with floor-to-ceiling glass, the one everyone passed on their way to the elevators, the one where good news was never delivered. I felt the shift in the air the moment I stood. A few coworkers pretended to focus on their screens a little too hard. Someone lowered their voice mid-sentence. The office always sensed blood before anyone named it. I walked toward the glass room, telling myself it was probably a routine update, maybe clarification for the quarterly briefing, but deep down, there was a pressure in my chest that felt like a warning. Damon was already inside, standing instead of sitting, leaning on the table with both palms like he was holding it down. His suit looked sharp enough to cut something, and his smile was the kind that curled only one side of his mouth, The kind used when someone thinks they've won before the game even starts. Kinsley, he said, as if reading my name off a script. Let's keep this quick. The phrasing hit me first, quick, as if 12 years of my life were a minor inconvenience on his calendar, as if the relationships I'd built, the systems I'd designed, the outcomes I delivered, all fit neatly behind a word meant to dismiss rather than acknowledge. He slid a folder toward me without sitting down. We're restructuring, he said, tone clean and polished. And unfortunately, your role doesn't align with where StratusWest is headed. I kept my eyes on him instead of the folder. Where exactly is the company headed? I asked, determined not to make this easy for him. Damon lifted his chin as if explaining to a child. Automation forward, efficiency optimized operations, scalable relationship management, client touchpoints standardized through digital protocols. It sounded like someone had shaken a bag of buzzwords over a PowerPoint slide, but he said it like scripture. I didn't give him the satisfaction of reacting. So after 12 years, you're telling me I'm suddenly obsolete? He gave a faint shrug, calculated, rehearsed. Legacy methods don't fit the future. The word legacy hit harder than I expected, not because of the insult buried inside it, but because I could see how much he enjoyed saying it. Damon wasn't firing me because he believed the company needed change. He was firing me because removing someone experienced made him feel powerful. Your severance details are in the folder, he added. It's generous. Generous. The word twisted in the air like a joke. I hadn't even opened the folder when a soft knock sounded behind me. HR had arrived, quiet and expressionless, hands clasped like they were attending a funeral. My funeral. Damon glanced at them, then back at me. We appreciate your contributions, truly. The falseness of the word truly made my skin crawl. I opened the folder only enough to skim the headers. Severance split into installments. NDA restrictions. A clean transition clause that felt like someone pushing a hand over my mouth. When I closed it, Damon looked relieved, as if he expected tears or outrage, and was pleased I hadn't given him the spectacle. Security will escort you to your desk, he said, gesturing toward HR like they were an extension of his arm. You can collect your personal items. For a moment, the world felt strangely detached, like I was watching the scene and living it at the same time. As I walked out of the glass room, I saw people lift their eyes, then quickly lower them. No one wanted to be caught looking at the condemned. HR handed me a branded tote already filled with my belongings. Someone had moved fast, too fast. My keyboard wrist pad, my favorite pen, the photo of my parents I kept tucked behind my monitor. Then I saw it, a small yellow sticky note peeking out from the seam of my notebook. My handwriting, sharp, intentional. A message to myself from a time I didn't yet know I'd need it. Check acquisition clause 12.4. The sight of it sent a jolt through me, a flicker of something I couldn't name yet. Not hope, not strategy, not revenge, just on possibility. I slipped it into my pocket, making sure no one else saw. Damon thought he'd escorted me out of the building with nothing but a tote bag and severance paperwork. He had no idea I just walked out with the one thing he never bothered to understand: leverage. I didn't cry in the elevator. I didn't shake. I didn't crumble the way Damon probably expected. Instead, I stood perfectly still while the car drifted downward, the fluorescent lights humming above me as if the building itself was waiting to see what I'd do next. When the doors slid open into the lobby, the world felt strangely muffled, like someone had wrapped the edges of everything in cotton. I walked outside holding that ridiculous tote bag, the strap digging into my shoulder, the weight of it far lighter than the weight settling in my chest. My car felt colder than usual when I got in, and I sat for a moment, gripping the steering wheel with one hand, the sticky note warm in my other. I kept rereading the words, check acquisition clause 12.4, trying to remember when I'd even written it. The letters looked rushed, almost like I'd scribbled it during a meeting, intending to revisit something important later, but I hadn't revisited it. I'd buried it under years of emergencies, deadlines, client crises, last-minute pivots, everything I'd carried for the company that tossed me out like outdated software. When I pulled into my driveway, the house felt too quiet. I dropped the tote onto the couch, sank beside it, and stared at nothing. Anger hadn't arrived yet. Grief hadn't either. What I felt was heavier, slower, the kind of weight that builds when someone decides your worth without ever knowing who you are. I finally opened my laptop, more out of muscle memory than intention. My folders blinked back at me. Thousands of files, contracts, frameworks, emails, project histories. 12 years of my life archived in neat digital rows. I searched for my acquisition paperwork, an old set of documents I hadn't touched since the firm bought out my small consulting practice years ago. That was before StratusWest rebranded, before foreign investors, before Damon swaggered in with his empty jargon. I opened the PDFs, scrolling through page after page until the words blurred. Then I found it, Clause 12.4, Intellectual Property Retention under Partial Asset Transfer. My pulse slowed as I read it once, twice, a third time. The clause wasn't short, but its meaning was unmistakable. Anything created by me under my original consulting entity remained mine, unless StratusWest purchased full rights. They never had. They'd licensed my systems, my templates, my retention models. Everything Damon probably thought came standard with the office furniture. And the license? It expired automatically upon termination. Termination they initiated. My laptop chimed. A text from Tessa. "Are you okay? Damon announced your departure on Slack. He said the team is moving toward digital-first relationship management. People are freaking out." Another message followed. "Also, a big client asked where you were. They didn't sound happy." I leaned back, letting the information settle. Clients weren't supposed to notice personnel changes. Not if leadership believed what they preached, but they noticed me. StratusWest's flaw had always been the same. They assumed relationships were interchangeable, that trust was plug and play. Damon didn't fire a position. He fired the one person clients called on Sunday mornings when something broke. I began pulling up old emails. Contracts I'd negotiated personally, performance evaluations, client feedback forms with specific praise tied to my work, not the company's. Receipts, proof, evidence that my value wasn't branding or automation. It was human. As the sun dipped below the neighborhood roofs, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Rena from legal, her message cautious. "Kinsley, something happened. Cole pulled out this afternoon, full termination. His team said they won't work with anyone else." I felt the first real spark of something sharp. Clarity, maybe even purpose. StratusWest thought they'd ended my story today. But with every client they lost, every clause I reread, every cached email I collected, something inside me shifted. This wasn't devastation. This was ignition. They had taken everything from me except the one thing they never understood. I wasn't someone they could erase. I was someone they had just unleashed. I hadn't intended to spend the entire night going through my archives, but once I started reading, I couldn't stop. It felt like I was walking backward through time, revisiting every late-night breakthrough, every client celebration, every strategy deck that had once made leadership beam as if they'd produced it themselves. Except now, seen through the lens of Clause 12.4, the meaning shifted entirely. These weren't just deliverables. They were assets, my assets, licensed, not owned. And StratusWest had been using them as if they belonged to the building's drywall. The more I read, the more the exhaustion faded. In its place came something steadier, colder. Focus. I opened another PDF, this one labeled Retention Model Proprietary. I remembered crafting the original version years ago, sitting in a cramped apartment with a broken AC unit, trying to design a system no client could resist. Later, StratusWest adopted it company-wide, acting like it materialized out of the cloud during a brainstorming session. They presented it at conferences. They put their logo on it. They even boasted about its unique internal methodology whenever new prospects toured the office floor. My hands curled into fists. I clicked through slide after slide, recognizing phrases I'd coined, diagrams I drafted, even the color palette I'd chosen at 2 a.m. after downing a grocery store energy drink. Damon had no idea any of this was mine. He had no idea he'd fired the one person holding the blueprint for everything StratusWest pretended to be. My phone buzzed again. Marla from operations. Kins, 2 more clients asked if you left voluntarily. When they heard you were pushed out, they set meetings with legal. Another buzz. Tessa again. Damon's panicking. He's calling emergency leadership sessions. People are whispering about unexpected churn. Unexpected churn. The phrase made me laugh under my breath. Damon thought stability came from systems, not people. He thought automation could replicate. Trust. He thought I was replaceable. He was about to learn how wrong he was. I pulled up the company's newest campaign materials, the ones Damon had bragged about during his first week. I expected sloppy execution, but what I found was something worse. They directly repurposed my framework, word for word in some places. Even my structure markers, the transitions I used, the way I categorized client tiers, everything was lifted wholesale. And because Clause 12.4 had never been bought out, every piece of it was unauthorized use. My stomach tightened, not with fear, but with anticipation. They had no idea how exposed they were. I opened a new folder on my desktop and titled it Violations. Into it, I dragged screenshots, timestamps, exported decks, internal newsletters praising our signature retention model, and email threads where executives claimed to have developed a modernized version internally. The more evidence I gathered, the more undeniable it became. Firing me had triggered a legal and financial trap they didn't know they'd stepped into. A knock on my front door startled me. It was nearly midnight, but when I opened it, my neighbor held a small package addressed to me. "This was left at my door by mistake," she said. I thanked her, and when I brought it inside, I realized it was from the co-working firm I had used once during the pandemic. Inside were updated contract templates I'd ordered months ago, back when I thought I might someday go independent. I'd forgotten all about them. The timing felt almost eerie, like the universe nudging me forward. I sat back down with the package beside me, the sticky note, the clause, the client exodus, the unauthorized use, the templates. All of it started aligning like pieces of a puzzle that had been scattered for years, waiting for the moment I was forced to see the full picture. Another message appeared on my screen, Rena again. "Heads up," she wrote. "The board asked for a crisis report. Damon is trying to blame your outdated methods." Outdated, that word again, the one he'd used to justify my firing, the one he'd used to erase me. And now the same outdated methods were the backbone of every strategy StratusWest relied on. They had built their entire identity on my work, and when they fired me, they severed their only legal access to it. I leaned back in my chair, the weight on my chest slowly lifting, replaced by something sharper. Something almost electric. They thought they'd taken everything from me. They thought walking me out with a tote bag was the end, but Clause 12.4 had teeth, steel ones, and StratusWest had just offered its neck. They weren't facing an ex-employee. They were facing the architect they underestimated, the creator whose work they stole, the woman holding the fuse to everything they'd built. And now that I understood exactly what they'd violated, the question wasn't whether I'd act. It was how fast. I wanted them to fall. By morning, my inbox looked like a warning siren. Client names I'd memorized years ago, people I could identify by the tone of their emails, were reaching out with clipped, formal messages. Requesting clarification. Concern regarding leadership shift. Seeking continuity alignment. Translation? They were spooked, irritated, and already halfway out the door. StratusWest had never understood how fragile trust was. They treated relationships like a subscription model, renewed automatically unless canceled. I always knew better. Trust required presence, memory, and patience. 3 things Damon had never managed to display in a single meeting. While I brewed my coffee, another message came through from Marla. "You won't believe this," she wrote. Then another text immediately after. "Executive floor is in meltdown." I clicked open the attached screenshot. A Slack thread, dozens of panicked messages from team leads reporting that 4 major accounts had paused deliverables pending strategic reassessment. 4 accounts pausing didn't sound catastrophic to someone outside the industry, but these weren't minor clients. They were the kind who paid for quarterly projections, annual retainers, multi-year contracts, the ones who paid for the entire office's overhead without blinking, the ones my retention model was designed to protect. Damon's response in the thread was predictable. Team, stay calm. We will reassure clients with our automated touchpoint system. Automated touchpoint system. He was still doubling down, still pretending he could standardize human connection. I didn't have to lift a finger. He was sabotaging himself beautifully. I took a long sip of coffee and opened my laptop to organize the evidence from last night. It wasn't just clause violations anymore, it was dominoes falling one after another. StratusWest leadership was already trying to spin the situation as a transitional phase, but no amount of PR polish could cover the fact that the clients were walking because I was gone. By noon, things had escalated further. Tessa called, whispering like she was hiding in a supply closet. Damon tried to host a video call with Cole's team, she said. They didn't show up, not a single person. They sent a one-line email instead. We prefer to work with someone who understands our operations intimately. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But I remembered the way he slid that folder across the glass table. How he didn't care enough to sit down. How dismissing me made him feel powerful. Whatever sympathy I had evaporated. While StratusWest scrambled, I turned my attention to something that suddenly felt more urgent, shaping what came next for me. I wasn't ready to contact clients directly yet, but I needed to build a foundation before the inevitable flood of inquiries. I opened the contract templates that had arrived last night, adjusting clauses to match the protection I never had at StratusWest. My new business name came to me without effort. Kinsley Strategic Advisory. Simple, clear, unmistakable. I registered it in 20 minutes. The moment I hit submit, my phone buzzed again, this time from Cole himself. Kinsley, his voicemail began, voice steady and confident. I heard what happened. Damon tried to pitch us some automated pipeline. I'm not interested. You built our growth plan. We want you if you're considering private work. Considering. That word lit something warm in my chest. I'd spent years building ladders for everyone else. Maybe it was time to build something for myself. And StratusWest had unknowingly supplied the perfect launchpad. Mid-afternoon, another message came, this one from Harold Crest, the CEO. We need to discuss recent developments, he wrote. Urgent. He didn't mention my firing. He didn't mention the clients leaving. He didn't mention Damon's unraveling leadership. CEOs rarely admit fault. They just circle around it, hoping you'll fill the silence with solutions. I didn't reply, not out of pettiness, but because the imbalance was shifting and I didn't want to interrupt the process. Let them sweat. Let them realize what Damon had broken. Let them see the cost of believing that my work, my relationships, and my methods were interchangeable parts in their corporate machine. Because for the first time in years, the power wasn't sitting in an executive office. It was sitting in my hands, in a quiet house, at a kitchen table with a half-finished cup of coffee. And I was just getting started. When Harold's assistant emailed asking for an in-person discussion, I let the message sit unread for a full day, not out of spite, but because timing mattered. Power only shifts when someone chooses not to move. When I finally replied with a simple, "Tomorrow at 10, I'll send the location," I knew the tone of the entire meeting had already been set. I chose a neutral co-working space downtown. Glass walls, clean lines, minimalist furniture. Not corporate, not mine. Just unfamiliar enough to make them uncomfortable. I arrived 15 minutes early, placed 2 folders on the table, one labeled ownership, the other violations, and waited. At exactly 10 o'clock, the door opened. Harold entered first, wearing that polished smile he saved for shareholder calls. Behind him came Damon, looking thinner than he had 2 weeks ago, his confidence hollowed out. 2 legal advisors followed, one clutching a laptop like a shield, the other carrying a stack of documents that looked suspiciously like printed copies of my emails. Kinsley, Harold said, settling into the chair opposite me. Thank you for meeting us. I nodded once. No small talk, no pleasantries. They didn't deserve them. We've had some turbulence, he continued carefully, and we'd like to align on solutions. Turbulence, repeated, letting the word stretch. That's one way to describe losing 5 major accounts in 72 hours. Damon flinched, a small, involuntary twitch. Harold cleared his throat, glancing at the legal team. Let's focus on a path forward. We will, I said. But first we're going to discuss ownership. I slid the first folder across the table. The lawyer with the laptop opened it and immediately stopped breathing. Clause 12.4 stared back at him, highlighted, boxed, annotated. This clause is no longer relevant, Damon said quickly. The systems you built were created under company direction. No, I replied calmly. My original consulting entity developed them independently. StratusWest licensed them, temporarily. I tapped the clause, and the license expired the moment you terminated my employment. Your decision. The second lawyer leaned in, scanning the contract, each line draining the color from his face. We need a moment, he murmured to Harold. No, I said, you need to keep reading. I pulled open the second folder, the one labeled Violations, and slid it across. Inside were timestamps, campaign decks, slide templates, and internal memos showing how StratusWest knowingly continued using my proprietary systems after the license had expired. Each example neatly organized, cross-referenced, and documented. Every time you repurposed one of my frameworks, I said, you breached the contract. Every pitch deck, every webinar outline, every client strategy, each instance is its own penalty. Damon tried to sit taller, but his voice cracked. We acted in good faith. You acted carelessly, I corrected, and illegally. Harold exhaled hard, the performance slipping. What do you want, Kinsley? He asked. Let's talk terms. Not yet, I said. Right now, you listen. For the next 10 minutes, none of them spoke. I walked them through each violation, each consequence, each legal implication. I wasn't cruel. I wasn't emotional. I was factual, precise, and devastating. When I finally slid the third sheet across the table, my offer, the room froze. Option 1, I said, full buyout of my intellectual property, retroactive, includes penalties. Damon's eyes widened when he saw the number circled at the bottom. This is outrageous. It's documented, I replied, and cheaper than litigation. Harold swallowed, then looked at the second option. Independent consultant. 6-month minimum, I said. Triple my previous salary, paid monthly, no net terms. You use the system strictly under my oversight. Silence. Long, unsteady silence. The lawyers whispered to each other, frantic and low. Damon looked like he might be sick. Harold finally spoke, voice barely above a murmur. We'll need to evaluate. Do it quickly, I said, standing. Every hour increases your exposure. I collected my pen, leaving the folders in front of them like neatly placed explosives. As I walked out, none of them stood. None looked up. For the first time since Damon had arrived at StratusWest, he understood the consequences of underestimating the wrong person. And before I reached the elevator, I already knew they were going to choose the buyout. 3 days after the negotiation, the wire hit my account, a number so large it almost looked like a typo. No argument, no counteroffer, no delay. StratusWest folded the second their legal team calculated what fighting me would cost. A formal apology email followed, stiff and over-polished, trying to sound heartfelt while avoiding any wording that might imply wrongdoing. I saved it anyway, not out of sentiment, but because it marked the exact moment the balance of power flipped for good. Damon resigned the next morning. To explore new opportunities, the announcement said, though everyone inside knew he'd been shoved out before he could tank the company any further. Harold kept his position, but messages from Tessa confirmed what I already suspected. His authority had evaporated. The board wanted someone who understood the difference between leadership and control. Meanwhile, my phone didn't stop buzzing. Not with reporters, though a few tried. not with recruiters, but with clients, former clients, new clients, referrals from referrals. People who weren't looking for a corporation. They were looking for someone who remembered their history, their anxieties, their goals, someone who didn't treat their business like a line item. Kinsley's strategic advisory grew faster than I could track. By the second week, I had a waiting list. By the third, I had to bring on 2 contract analysts. And by the end of the month, even Harold's assistant reached out. Not for a deal, just for guidance. A quiet acknowledgement of everything StratusWest had lost when they let me go. I never replied. My energy was no longer theirs to borrow. 6 months later, my days looked nothing like the ones I'd lived for the past 12 years. My office was a corner table at a small cafe overlooking the waterfront, a place with real voices, real warmth, real people. Clients flew in to meet me. They trusted my work. They listened, and when their companies grew, they remembered who helped them get there. One afternoon, a woman approached my table, Jenna, a former account manager from StratusWest. She looked exhausted, hopeful, and afraid all at once. I walked out. She said quietly, "I couldn't take it anymore. I want to build something of my own, but I don't know where to start." I slid my laptop toward her. "You don't need the whole world figured out," I told her. "Just a solid foundation and the courage to bet on yourself." She blinked hard, absorbing the words like oxygen. I gave her templates, referrals, warnings, encouragement. Everything I wish someone had given me before I ever stepped into that glass-walled conference room. As she left, shoulders higher than when she arrived, I realized something profound. StratusWest didn't end my story. They freed it. They freed me from a system that only valued me when I made someone else look competent. They freed me from the ceiling I didn't know I'd hit. They freed me to build a life where I chose my work, my clients, my future, and maybe most importantly, they freed every person who saw what happened to me and realized they didn't have to stay somewhere that treated them like they were disposable. I took a slow sip of coffee, sunlight warming the back of my hands, and smiled. Losing that job was the best mistake they ever made, and walking away was the smartest thing I ever did. When I look back on everything that happened, the biggest lesson isn't about contracts, strategy, or even revenge. It's about self-respect. For years, I convinced myself that loyalty would eventually be honored, that hard work would protect me, that staying silent made me reasonable. What I learned is that silence only protects the people who benefit from it. The moment they walked me out that door, I finally saw the truth. Sometimes the place you've given the most to is the one that values you the least. And the real danger isn't losing the job, it's losing yourself long before they fire you. My revenge wasn't about destroying them. I didn't need total victory, and honestly, I didn't want it. I just wanted the consequences to land where they belonged. Damon needed to face what he broke. Harold needed to see the cost of ignoring the people who actually kept the ship afloat. And I needed to remember that walking away is not weakness, it's clarity. Sometimes forgiveness is self-liberation, but sometimes silence is the sharpest knife, and choosing not to return someone's calls says everything you need to say. This story applies to life right now more than ever. We live in a world where workplaces preach family until it's inconvenient, where people burn out pretending to be irreplaceable, where loyalty is expected but rarely reciprocated. My advice? Don't wait for a crisis to find your voice. Document your work, protect your ideas, build relationships outside the walls of your job, and never let someone convince you that you owe your future to a place that treats you like you're temporary. How to get started today. Write down the value you bring, skills, relationships, contributions. Update your contracts, resume, or portfolio with concrete examples. Reach out to one person you trust professionally. Strengthen that connection. Start a freedom folder, ideas, templates, plans you'll need if life shifts. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What part of this story hit you the hardest? Drop a comment, share it with someone who needs the reminder, and subscribe if you want more stories told honestly from the inside.